On today's show, a full breakdown of what became a 117-109 loss down in Miami for the Atlanta Hawks. They fall back to 500, and it was kind of a nightmare night from the star backcourt. We'll get into all of what transpired in this game and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1425 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep into the night on a Saturday evening into Sunday. And today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users have a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That is PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. And also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day, no matter where you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and we're also on the video side over on YouTube. And today's show, we'll dive into what became a narrow loss for the Hawks down in Miami, 117-109. The Hawks are now back to 500 on the season at 32-32 with this one. They were down by as many as 21 points. The Hawks were didn't play well in this game. They also didn't play terribly in this game either. They were back within 5 down the stretch a few different times, and it was certainly competitive. And as I'll get into in a second, it was a tough spot for Atlanta, given their travel and all of that. But really the headliner, I think, has to be, big picture, the struggles from the star backcourt of the Hawks in this game. Combined, Trae Young and Dejounte Murray shot 5 of 25 from the floor, 0 of 10 from 3, and had 18 combined points. Now, they did have 7 steals, including a career-high 5 from Trae Young. But it's basically going to be, I would say, close to impossible for the Hawks to beat a good team, or at least even a decent team, on the road in particular, with Trae and Dejounte doing what they did tonight. The Hawks were in position to steal this one at times in the fourth quarter, but it was going to be probably require one of them to get kind of hot at some point, and it just never really happened. So the whole loss is not on them. I will always say, try to give you some nuance on the podcast. And there were other issues. It was not just Trae and Dejounte struggling. And again, I thought Trae's defense was pretty good in this game, but the Hawks are going to have a lot of trouble trying to overcome 5 of 25 from the floor and 0 of 10 from 3 from their 2 obvious star players. And that is definitely the place to start in this one. And even beyond that, Trae Young and the Miami Heat is a potential kryptonite situation at this point. If you were around for it, you, I'm sure, remember this at this point in time, but Trae Young was pretty much dreadful in the playoff series last year against Miami. He shot 32% from the floor, and for me, it was basically the worst stretch of his career, other than maybe parts of his rookie season. But once he became established, that was as bad as he's been over a multiple game sample. He did have some better games this year against Miami in the first 2 appearances, but still didn't shoot well, 35% from the floor in those first 2 games. And again, he was good defensively tonight by any standard, not just Trae standards. He was pretty good. 5 steals obviously is not the only part. That's part of it too. Quinn Snyder actually said after the game that Trae was great, which I think was definitely some intentional positive reinforcement for Trae's defense, because offensively he obviously was not good in this game. And look, defense matters, but he was really bad on offense in this game. By his standards, for sure, but really by anyone's standards. He also hurt them in transition by crashing offensive glass in this game for stuff that he probably had no chance to get. He tried to force it a little bit in the second half with some shot selection disparity, and just, plainly shot 2 of 13 from the floor for 8 points. If you have 8 points on 13 shooting possessions or 14 shooting possessions as a player, and by the way, that included a meaningless bucket with like 25 seconds to go in the game, something like that. So it's really 6 points in the actual competitive portion of this contest. And it's a new season low for scoring for Trae. And I am the first to tell you that points are not the only thing that matters. But when you have a season low by 6 points and you are a guy who definitely leans on his scoring, that is noteworthy. Also, it would have been his season low for last year too. So he's not actually scored fewer than 9 points since January of 2021. So 26 months ago. That's a long time. And again, that's not everything, but Trae was not good in this game, and Dejounte wasn't much better. Kind of a one-night swing from Dejounte Murray making essentially everything on the way to a career high performance on Friday in the definitely a much more fun game and a victory at home, to coming back the next night and actually shooting 3 of 14 from the floor and 0 of 5 from 3. So that's part of it. As far as the rest of the sort of takeaways, observations from this game itself, offensively, given what I just said, you would have thought the Hawks were just terrible on offense in this game, and they actually weren't that bad. Now, they weren't good, but they had a 111 offensive rating in this contest. It was less than 100 in the first half, so sub 1 point per possession in that first half. So it was better in the second half for sure. They ended up shooting 57% on twos. That's a very solid number. Only 9 of 30 on three, though, which is not just horrific, but not good either, obviously. And if you remove, and we'll come back to these guys later on, Saddiq Bey and Bogdanovic combined to shoot 7 of 13 from three. So the rest of the team in this one, I believe, 2 of 17. So that kind of tells you the story. They did get up 30 free throw attempts in this game, including some in the fourth quarter that were important to close the gap. But turnover-wise, it was more than usual from this Hawks team, and they were really bad in transition. They ended up actually scoring 17 fast break points, but in the first half, they just kind of fumbled away multiple opportunities. They were below average on the glass and just never had that full rhythm. They were better with the bench unit in this game for sure than when it was more featuring Trae and Dejounte, but nothing was perfect along the way for sure on offense. And then defensively, it was a similar story. It wasn't awful by any means, but there were some fundamental issues in pick and roll coverage at times. Actually, my friend Glenn Willis, who's been on the show many times, including once last week on the show, he said this on Twitter, and I went back and saw it on film as well before I started recording this podcast. But basically, the Heat kind of spammed a similar action in the fourth quarter over and over again to expose a weakness in the Hawks defensive alignment and taking advantage of both some young big men. Obviously, they were playing with Jalen Johnson and Okongwu at that point in time. And to their credit, those guys helped to close the gap in the game, make this game much more competitive. But also when you combine those two guys with a wing pairing of Bogdanovic and Bey, those guys, by the way, Bogey and Bey, shot the heck out of the ball, and they were important in this game. But defensively, that pairing is not great, let's just say. In fact, it's basically to the point where Bogey and Bey have to shoot incredibly well to actually function together as the wing pairing because they are that bad defensively. And the Heat, to their credit, Erik Spoelstra is a great coach, sort of exploited that down the stretch. Anyway, the rest of the defense, wasn't like perfect. On the glass, it was kind of a rough state of affairs, especially when Capella was off the floor in this one. And then also Miami just shot the ball better than Atlanta did throughout the night, which didn't help, obviously, if you're the Hawks. The Heat did have a lot of turnover issues, which definitely allowed the Hawks to stick around in this game. We'll come back to it later on, but in the fourth quarter in particular and late in the third quarter, Miami's lack of ball security really kind of helped the Hawks get back into the game. But 20 turnovers for Miami, and it still wasn't enough for the Hawks to go over the finish line, and that kind of tells you sort of what the disparity was in the rest of the game itself. So, big picture, this is a game where it's not a travesty kind of loss. I know some Hawks fans get mad when I say that kind of thing, but look, the Hawks were underdogs in this game. Our friends at FanDuel, who sponsor this podcast, shouts to FanDuel, have had the Hawks as about 3-point underdogs on the road. And yes, Miami was also on a back-to-back in this game, but the Hawks had a long amount of travel after a win on Friday. Miami did play yesterday, but did not have to travel. They were at home. So that's a notable advantage for the Heat rest-wise. And also they took a pretty frustrating loss at the buzzer, did Miami. I'm sure that did not hurt them in terms of motivation in this game. They didn't have Kyle Lowry. That honestly might have helped the Hawks, honestly, at this point in time. But, at the end of the day, a single-digit loss to the Heat on the road on a back-to-back is not cause for alarm, especially when you factor in that no matter what you think about Trae and Dejounte, I know some people are sort of more mixed than I am. Those guys are really good. They're not likely to play this badly on offense most of the time. And if they had just played an average game on offense, the Hawks probably win, or at least it would have been very, very close at the end of this one. So as far as like frustration levels, I saw lots and lots and lots of typical maybe frustration or anger or whatever on Twitter. And look, the Hawks are 1-2 under Quinn Snyder. That doesn't really matter to me. Obviously, it matters for the season, but it's like, it's not like he's doing a bad job. But still, the Hawks are 500 again. That's frustrating. And as far as the standings are concerned, if this year is your primary focus, losing a head-to-head game against Miami that you could have won, I would say realistically, isn't great because Miami is the team that you're trying to close the gap on at this point. At least one of the teams you're trying to close the gap on. So sort of a double loss there. But the bright side is you're going to stay in Miami now if you're the Hawks. And then on Monday, they have a chance to right the ship. And if they're going to split Miami, that would be actually a very positive result on the road, given that the Heat are a team that is at least as good as the Hawks are on paper this year, and that the Hawks have had all kinds of issues with in the last 2 seasons. All right, we'll get into how this game kind of unfolded in a moment. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you're looking for a DFS option this time of year, make sure you check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It's amazing, and I know that you will love it as well. It's very easy to use. I've been playing there for quite some time, and it's really a breeze to operate at PrizePicks. All you have to do is pick 2 6 players and choose will actually have more or less than a certain number of points or rebounds or assists or steals, and a PrizePicks more than 25 times. Yes, 25 times the money on any entry that you're putting in. They offer numbers on sports that you might enjoy. That includes stuff beyond the NBA, which of course they certainly have as well, but college basketball, NFL, college football, MLB, NHL, PGA, soccer, esports, and much more. And a whole entry can be done just a minute or less. It's that easy and it's that quick. Plus, it's just you against the numbers. PrizePicks have safe and fast withdrawals. They're operating in more than 30 states plus Canada. At this point, download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports right now. And if you're a first-time user, get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. Don't forget that promo code. It is Locked On. And sign up for that instant deposit match up to $100. Check it out now at PrizePicks. All right, we'll get into the game now and how it sort of unfolded here. The Hawks did start the game out with a 4-0 lead, actually, with Clint Capella, who played well in this game. He was on a short list of guys who played very well for the Hawks in this one. Nice play design, I thought, out of the gate. Actually, Nekias Duncan, a former guest on this podcast, great analyst and the co-host of the Dunker Spot, another great podcast in the NBA space, sort of highlighted this, but it was a nice play design that kind of involved Trae setting a nice screen to free up Capella. Obviously, it's the first play of the game, so you have an opportunity to run something good, and that worked out very well. But then Miami took the lead and basically led, or at least were in control of things the majority of the way. A 17-6 run by Miami. The Hawks were missing some shots, didn't have a field goal for like 4 minutes, basically, and then also had some transition issues along the way. Rotationally, no huge surprises, but I'll go through it now, what transpired in this one. So Bogey was the first sub for Trae. Bogey was not good in the first half. I thought he was better in the second half because he made shots, but defensively, it was a little bit flammable. And on the second out of a back-to-back, I would be looking to rest Bogey sometimes, and at the very least, not play him a ton of minutes on back-to-backs. And he played 13 minutes in a row in the first half, which I probably would not be wanting to do at this stage. But anyway, he was better after halftime, so that was certainly helpful. Saddiq Bey came in earlier than usual with John Collins having a second foul, and we'll come back to it later on, but Collins was very bad in this game and looks to be out of sorts for sure since the All-Star break. I'm not sure if it's a concussion or the back or just not playing well, but he's not playing well at this point in time, and they've gone with Bey more as a result of that. Okongwu came at the usual time, and then as I discussed the last few podcasts, it seems like the Hawks are going to be choosing between Jalen Johnson and AJ Griffin for that 9th spot, and it was Jalen Johnson again for the second straight game in this one. I like seeing Jalen play, but one more time, as I said before, earlier, him playing with that bench unit does have the Hawks playing Saddiq Bey and Bogey on the wings, and that is a flammable defensive pairing, particularly when you're paired with a point guard. So that's going to be interesting to see how that sort of is adjusted around, because while Bey certainly has offensive strengths and Bogey does as well, those guys at the 2 and the 3 especially is not going to work defensively in the big picture sense. But also of note, AJ Griffin, who didn't play in the rotation last night but ended up getting in the game late, this is his first DNP in more than 50 games. He had been playing every night since like November. So I'm not surprised by it at this point. There's been a little bit of foreshadowing about that with the way that Snyder's talked about it. And obviously last night he wasn't in the rotation either, but we'll see if that changes on Monday or if it changes in Washington. But it seems like Jalen has the lead in that battle right now. And by the way, I have no real issue with that. I think AJ had been playing worse in the last couple of weeks, maybe getting into that rookie wall, etc. I'd like to see him still stay engaged and play a little bit more. Like, for instance, tonight would have been a good night in my mind to not have Bogey play on a back-to-back. Obviously, he ended up helping them in the second half. But we'll see if that happens, later on this week or something like that. But Griffin should stay ready, and we'll see when he sort of returns to the rotation at this point in time. Still, like some pretty sloppy basketball late in the first quarter by both teams. The Hawks ended up being down only 3 points, and which is not really bad considering how poorly they shot the ball in the first quarter. But the Heat, as they did the entire game, had 8 turnovers in that first quarter to kind of give the Hawks a lifeline. Miami had a big run, though, early in the second quarter, an 8-0 run to go up by 10 points. Miami was in control really the entire way after that. The Hawks had a really tight whistle, I thought. There were 12 fouls called on the Hawks before Miami got a 6th foul. So a lot of fouls called on Atlanta in this game all the way through. It ended up being a little bit tighter in terms of more even after that, which is nice to see. But foul trouble along the way. Okongwu had it. Collins had it. Bogey even had some at some point. The Hawks were, again, transition-wise, kind of rough. Cody Zeller had a great stretch for the Heat in the first half, which is weird to see. And the Hawks had their largest deficit of the first half at the buzzer because Bam had a jump shot to go up by 17 at the break. The Hawks shot 50% from the floor in the second quarter. Pretty good, right? They lost the quarter by 14 points. That's really hard to do because they had 6 turnovers. They were 0-1 at the free throw line, and then Miami shot 65% from the floor and had 11 free throw attempts in that quarter. So you don't often see a 50% shooting quarter in the NBA turn into a 14-point deficit in that quarter alone. but it was really rough. And as I said before, Trae and Murray, it was the whole game. They had 7 points on 12 shots in the first half. I think that was probably their lowest scoring half of the season. I couldn't find that like quickly, but given that they only had 18 in the game, which I think was their lowest output of the game there as well, at least of the season there. But it was early, often, and the entire way for those guys struggling. After halftime, the Hawks started out very slowly and honestly felt like it was going to be game over in the third quarter because the Hawks had 4 points in almost 5 minutes, missing 6 straight shots. They were fortunate to only quote unquote be down by 19 points because Miami couldn't score either. There was an awful possession before the mid-quarter timeout where the Hawks had a couple of open threes that they passed on, no flow at all. Murray ends up turning the ball over and then going into a timeout, gets a technical foul, just some frustration stuff there. The Hawks were within 15 at one point, but it was back up to 21. And I flagged that. It was 80-59 with about 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. So that was the high water mark for the deficit. They had a nice run at the end of the third quarter, which is kind of what they had to do at that point in time. What you need to do there when you're down by 21 mid-third quarter is like, all right, let's get it down to 10 or 12. And they did. It was a 10-2 run immediately, got it down to 12 by the end of the quarter after a steal by Trae and a dunk by Jalen Johnson. And they ended up winning the third quarter, which was sort of baby steps. In the fourth, they kept it going, but it was really the offense that did it. It was Bey, it was Bogdanovic, and even Murray had a couple buckets in that fourth quarter as well. Both teams started making threes, Bogey and Bey, and then it was Hero for the Heat. So the problem was the Hawks basically just traded buckets for a large majority of the fourth quarter. And when you were the team that's losing by 10, 12 points, that isn't going to work. Now, they got it to 5 on multiple occasions. So they were right there. The Hawks were never within one possession, but it was certainly within 2 multiple occasions. Trae actually was on the bench longer than usual. And I said that on Twitter, not in a judgmental way, just as a note, because usually when Trae if there's a timeout with like 7 minutes, 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, he's already in the game. It didn't happen in this game. And that was okay with me. And Quinn Snyder addressed it after the game, basically just said he went and told Trae that he was going to wait with that group for a little bit longer. Trae had no issue with it, but it was easy to see why Trae had been struggling and that group had been rolling, but he basically never sits that long in the fourth quarter. Now, of course, coming out of that timeout, the Hawks had a little bit of a hiccup, gave up 4 points in a row, and then were down by 9. And then after that timeout, I even called it. I was like, he's coming back in now, and he did, along with Capella and Hunter at that stage. Hunter actually had his best stretch of the game by far. He hit 3 straight jump shots after being ice cold. Just kind of came in and made 3 jumpers in a row. Hats to him for that little stretch. But again, the Hawks just couldn't get stops. And essentially for about 3 minutes straight, it was 7-5, 7-5 to 7-5 in the deficit. And that's okay. But eventually someone's going to stop scoring. And it was the Hawks in this instance. In fact, Atlanta had 5 consecutive empty possessions on offense. And that essentially ended the game. Miami scored on their first 3 to intersperse with that 5. And when that little run was over, it was a 12-point game again with 2 minutes to go. And it was down to 8 in scramble mode with about a minute left, but it was really never close again. So kind of the dam broke there when they finally stopped scoring. And realistically, they could not expect to just keep scoring every possession. But even then, it was Trae and Dejounte that were ice cold in that stretch again. And that is part of the problem with the lineup that they were using. They were trying to score. And that's a very common and very understandable technique the coaches do when they're losing in the fourth quarter. Something Nate did a lot as well, is you go offense. And that works if you keep scoring and get the occasional stop. And this time, the Hawks didn't quite keep scoring. And then defensively, playing Saddiq Bey, playing with those guys is not going to necessarily work all that well on the defensive end of the floor. And that ended up kind of biting them at the end. But I definitely understood it. And, closing without Collins was the right move in this game. He had been playing so poorly that it was probably between Bey and Johnson, which is definitely strange, but certainly was the reality in this spot. And then the Hawks again, not embarrassing by any means, but we're not able to get over the hump at this point. Okay, we'll get into sort of the player evaluations. There's plenty to say about this game, as well as a brief look ahead to the week that is to come for the Hawks. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a fantastic treat right now that is delicious, but also don't want all the fat and calories that come along with that, Built Bar is the option for you. I know a goal of mine this year is to eat a little bit better, a little bit healthier in 2023 than I did last year. If you're anything like me, eating healthy is tough sometimes because the taste part actually matters. But with Built Bar, it is the best option possible because it has good taste and good health all the way around with healthy with Built Bar. Healthy is tasty, and they're so delicious. You won't believe that they're actually good for you as well. 100% real chocolate on the outside of the Built Bars, and they come in a ton of awesome flavors. My personal favorite is cookies and cream, but they also have peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and many more. Built Bars have 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar to go along with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And you don't have to wait to get them at this point in time. I've been telling you for a while, and it's still a fantastic option, by the way, to get them at Built.com. Built.com has the whole catalog of Built Bars available, but also you can get them right now in a store at Walmart or Sam's Club. Walmart has them in stock right now. Also, Sam's Club, if you want to get a 13-bar box in a hurry, is a fantastic option for you as well. Make sure you check out Built Bars no matter where you get them, Built.com, Walmart, or Sam's Club, and dive in today. All right, on to the player evaluations of this game that, again, became a 117-109 loss in Miami. The Hawks played 9 guys. None of those guys was AJ Griffin, so that's something to at least note. But as for the players who did appear, Jalen Johnson played the least, along with John Collins. Those guys played about the same amount of time. We'll start with Jalen. 5 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. They're using him more at the perimeter defensively. That's the right decision. But again, it comes back to also the lineups they're playing with. So Jalen's playing a lot of minutes. Yes, as the 4, but also alongside Bey and Bogey, and that means he's the guy at the point of attack on the wing, which makes sense. It's a skill set that he definitely has, but we'll see about that in the future. I thought he was pretty good in this game. He didn't light the world on fire, but I thought he played well defensively in particular. More good minutes there, and I think the future is certainly very, very bright for Jalen Johnson. Bogey, kind of a tale of 2 halves, still wasn't great in the second half, but still had 13 points on 9 shots, ended up making 3 threes. They were very important shots. Defensively, certainly a step or 2 slow. And I said it before, but I would not mind seeing him either play less or play not at all on back-to-backs. And that's not a quality thing. I think Bogey is very important, as I've been saying for the last few weeks. Like when he's right, the Hawks are their best selves. But I think the back-to-back stuff and try to keep the load off of him would be a good idea, given that they have Griffin to play, especially when everybody's healthy, to go ahead, just give those minutes, at least some of them, to AJ in these spots. Okongwu was good and missed 15 points, 4 rebounds, did have his customary foul trouble, had 5 fouls in 23 minutes, but got to the line 8 times. That's actually a career high in attempts, I believe, for Okongwu, or at least something like that. I saw that from Hawks PR. 15 points, 4 rebounds. Defensively was solid. Wasn't actually his absolute best, I didn't think, defensively in this one, but certainly had some nice moments. And then Saddiq Bey, it's kind of the same story it's been for the last couple of games, and I'm sure people are getting frustrated with it, but on offense, he was very good in this game. 22 points to lead the entire Hawks roster in scoring. 4 of 8 from 3, 3 of 5 on 2s, 4-4 at the free throw line, had 3 rebounds and 2 assists to go along with 2 turnovers, was +3. Look, he's not going to shoot this well. I said on Twitter, got some pushback. I'm not saying he's not going to be a good shooter. I like the shooting quite a bit. He's a career 36% three-point shooter. I actually would buy him being like a high 30s, maybe even low 40s guy with the Hawks at some point, because the shot quality will be better than he was getting in Detroit. He's shooting like 54% from 3 right now. So it's going to cool off a little bit, but the spacing has been very valuable. They have definitely been their best on offense with him playing the 4 since he got here. So that's a good sign. Defensively, it is very flammable, and I'm not trying to be negative about it, but it's just unavoidable if you watch the tape. He's been probably their worst defender, like worse than Trae, worse than Bogey since he got here. And that could change. He's got more tools than those guys do defensively, and maybe he'll get up to speed. It's a new system for him, and there's certainly a little bit of room for maneuverability there, but it's been a little bit bad. So we'll just come back to that later on, but certainly he's giving them good stuff on offense, and that is very, very, very helpful. And I had no issue at all with him closing, because he was certainly the guy making shots and keeping them involved in this game. To the starters. We're going to Collins now. And look, it's bad. I know that I have the reputation earned for being high on John Collins. I think that most people are overreacting right now to John Collins, a guy who has a 5-year sample size of being a very, very good NBA player. But since the All-Star break, he's been bad, and there's no way around it. Again, there could be a reason. There could be, the concussion that kind of messed him up during the break. He had a back issue after that. That could be part of the story. But this season, offensively, has been his worst season as a pro. That's already was the case. It's actually gotten worse the last couple of weeks. The role was so small. He has a career low usage. That's partly on him, partly on the team. He's playing with a non-shooting big, all that stuff. I think the addition of Murray definitely made it harder on Collins. That was something we talked about even over the summer. Like, he was going to have the smallest role he's probably ever had, and that was still the case now. So we'll see if it snaps. The calls for him to just not play. People are being a little bit silly about calling him unplayable or saying he's terrible. That's not true. It's just not and of course I'm wired to say and this would be the case for any player on the Hawks roster, not just because it's Collins. I'm not going to ignore 5 years of data in favor of a small sample size. I'm just not. Jalen Johnson for the future, would not surprise me at all if he's the starting power forward for the Hawks. Saddiq Bey is very valuable. And I've talked about it with Tyler Jones in recent days. Like, I'm kind of assuming John won't be on the team beyond the season. We'll see. He's still under contract and all that fun stuff. But as far as this game is concerned, he was quite bad. And I had no issue at all with him not playing a lot down the stretch. He was Snyder was not asked, and I was, of course, not in Miami to ask this question, but I would have liked to hear what he said if he was asked about Collins playing this little, because the first few games he was on a minutes restriction, and that kind of explained it. This time around, I'm not aware that he's still on a restriction. There was some foul trouble in the mix to help him 16 minutes on the floor, but it was notable that he sat for a long time at the end of the game. And again, it was the right decision, but it was something that you would normally like to hear the coach weigh in on. So I'll be interested to see if there's any follow-up on that in the future. But as far as like his performance goes, he was quite bad in this game, and I'll just leave it there for now. We'll have more on that in the future. Okay. DeAndre Hunter, the one nice stretch in the fourth quarter when he made three jump shots in a row. Otherwise, I thought he was below average in this game. 17 points is fine, obviously. 3 rebounds, typical for him in a lot of ways. 2 assists, 6 of 10 from the floor, 1 of 4 from 3. Again, he was not terrible, just not a kind of a blah game other than those 3 jumpers in the fourth quarter, which definitely mattered for sure. Capella, I thought, was probably their best player, other than at least their best overall, like, two-way player. I think Bey was their best offensive player in this game. Capella just overall was very, very good. 16 points, 13 rebounds, had a block and a steal. He wasn't like perfect, but just kind of did Clint stuff and was efficient around the rim, 8 of 10 from the floor. So, wasn't like he blew the entire game out of the water or anything like that. But I thought basically their best players in this game were Capella and Okongwu, both centers, not a surprise. And then, Bey on offense. You could certainly argue for Bogey's second half, but Trae and Tre's defense was pretty good. But it was a short list of guys who like just played well. I think certainly Bey played well, given like what he's capable of doing defensively, and his offense was very, very important. But aside from Capella and Okongwu, it would be hard to find like two-way excellence by anybody in this game. But there you go. And then we covered it earlier, so I won't do the whole thing again. But Trae and Dejounte will have better nights. I have no concerns about Trae and Dejounte after this game. It's a 1-game sample size. I will say Trae in Miami is a bit concerning. We talked about it a little bit with Tyler Jones on a podcast that I did earlier this week. But if you missed that, by the way, it's still very much available in your archive, along with my conversation I had with Glenn Willis this week and everything else. I encourage you to subscribe to the show. Anyway, as far as that is concerned, I don't know if it's a real thing that Miami is just like his kryptonite, but Trae has not given anybody any hope with his performances against Miami. So if they end up in a playoff series or a play-in matchup with Miami, alarm bells on that. Trae is the kind of guy who could break out of that with one performance. He could just suddenly have 40 in a game against Miami, and I wouldn't be too surprised. But they've had his number for a while. And then Dejounte, like, tailed 2 nights. He was so good on Friday. He was really bad tonight. It's going to happen, and his normal baseline is somewhere in the middle, obviously, at this stage. Okay, we'll get out of here now with a quick look ahead. There is a rematch to come between the Hawks and the Heat on Monday in Miami. So it's one of these series. In fact, they have these 2 series back-to-back. They play Miami twice, and then they play Washington twice later on this week. With the loss tonight, though, the Hawks are a game and a half behind Miami for the 7 seed. They're 3.5 games behind Brooklyn. So they're not in terrible shape, but they're not in great shape. Also, only a half game ahead of the 9 seed at this point, which I believe is Toronto after they won in Washington today. So it's that time of year when I'm not going to go into the full breakdown of the standings every single episode, but with the Hawks only have 18 more games remaining. Every game, as far as this season is concerned, matters in the standings. Toronto is right behind them, only a half game. Washington's only a game and a half behind them. I do believe the Hawks are fairly safe in terms of actually making the play-in. They have a 3-game lead on the 11 spot, which is the Bulls. And the Hawks, as long as they are relatively healthy, I think are just like solidly better than the Bulls. So we'll see. But as far as like getting to 6, it's not undoable. But this loss to Miami was not great for that. And I don't want to put too much on it. But the game on Monday against Miami could be one of those games that like either makes or breaks, potentially. Not breaks, but makes things difficult for the Hawks if they were to lose that game. Because if they lose, now you're 2.5 behind Miami, and you lose the season series. So right now it's 2-1 in favor of Miami for the series. If it's 2-2, that helps you, and obviously you're back within a half game of Miami. If you lose that one, you lose a tiebreaker, and you're 2.5 back of Miami. Not great. So I don't want to put undue influence or undue attention on that game on Monday. It's still a road game against a quality opponent. We'll see about injury stuff. Jimmy Butler was questionable in this game, ended up playing, so we'll see if he's 100% healthy on Monday, if the Hawks have any injury issues between now and then either. But stay tuned for that one to be certainly a big game. And the Hawks probably need to steal that one, I would say, to salvage what is kind of a not terribly frustrating, but certainly a little bit frustrating to have, the Snyder era is now 1-2. And I think they might be underdogs again on Monday when the line comes out from FanDuel. So stay tuned for all that. And then more manageable in Washington, D.C. for sure later on this week. But a little spoiler alert here. The first game back at home is on Saturday on a back-to-back against Boston. So Boston's really good. That'll be a tough game. And getting through this road trip at least 2-2 would be nice. You're hoping for 3-1, but now that requires you to sweep the next 3. So we'll have full coverage of that game on Monday and everything beyond it. I doubt I have a podcast between now and Monday because of the weekend and all that stuff. But if anything happens in huge fashion, I'll break in as I always do. But please subscribe to the show. That's the way to find out if you'll get the show immediately, is to subscribe across your podcast platforms of choice. Auto download as well, if you will do that for me. I appreciate that. Across platforms, Apple and Spotify and Overcast and Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn Radio, Odyssey app, all those places have the podcast. And then also on video over on YouTube. Likes and subscriptions are fantastic there as well. Ratings and reviews. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Also follow my Patreon if you are willing to do so. Patreon.com/BT Rowland. And I appreciate all the listens. I said this on Twitter tonight, but I'll cap the show by saying this. It was one of the bigger 2-week stretches of traffic in the history of this podcast. Obviously, that was greatly aided by the coaching change and the new hire and all that stuff. So I'm not taking credit for that, but I do appreciate everyone supporting the show. So please continue to do that for me. I do thank you for that. And without further delay, I'll sign off now. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you after the game on Monday.